Well, we're now going into item 3, which is the Bond Series A resolution of the authority. And Sandy, I guess you're going to be up. Do we want to start with a motion and then have you explain it?
So the motion would be to adopt the 2021 Series A resolution in the form presented.
Entertain that motion.
I'll move that motion.
Gina
Second.
moves it. Who said Bob seconded? Okay, Sandy, please review it with us.
Okay.
This is what 22 pages long, but
Yeah, I'm not gonna go through the whole 22 pages, but what I'd like to do is just summarize what's in it and why you have that before you. So
fine.
if you recall, there's a 2014 bond that had a bullet or a payoff coming in September of 2021 at $6,510,000. The interest rate on that was 2.39%. The interest rates today are hovering around 1%. And so it was decided, both because the interest rates are so low now, and also because Pam and Mark really wanted to conclude the refunding of this before, in this fiscal period, to clear the way for new bonds, that we would try to do something before your fiscal year end. We entertained a rate lock agreement. The last time I was before you, you actually approved the rate lock agreement. But since that time, the general consensus of the professionals is that we should go straight forward and issue the bond with the rates as low as they are, and not get sidelined with the rate lock agreement. That would cost more money in fees and would require you to put up 3% of the par of the bond. And I'm not sure it's worth, given sort of, even though the interest rates are a bit volatile, it's not so volatile that we need to rush to a rate lock agreement. Now, having said all that, we also couldn't enter into a rate lock agreement until you adopted a series resolution, and that's a requirement of TD Bank. So you still have many options, but before you tonight is the actual borrowing resolution for not to exceed $6,660,000. It's a 5-year bond, so it's going to be amortized over the 5 years. Right now, the interest rates are hovering about 1.06%. When I was before you back in December, it was about 11 basis points lower, but it's been up and down ever since. The proceeds of this bond are going to be used for two things. One is to pay off the 2014 bond, and then the second use is to net fund a debt service reserve fund. And so what this series resolution has is the security for the bonds is twofold. It's a revenue pledge, and then as required under the bond resolution, there's a debt service reserve fund. Rather than take you through each section of the series resolution, I thought because there are so many new members on this call that I would just take the structure of how you borrow for bonds and just give you an overview and why we have this series resolution. So bonds are issued under an indenture. It's something called a general resolution, and that sets forth all the terms and conditions of how you issue a bond. It has to, what the security has to be, how long it can be, what makes it tax exempt, the permitted purpose, what a project can be. And so we don't repeat that bond issue after bond issue. What we do try to do is issue all your debt under the general bond resolution. And the reason for that is that you have multiple borrowings out there. They're all on a parity, meaning that if something happened and you defaulted on everything, every bondholder, every registered owner would stand in equal line against the revenues of the authority for their bonds. So they call them pari passu bonds, all on a parity. So what this series, and the way that you do this is through a series resolution. So this series resolution, first of all, delineates the terms of the bond. And so you'll see in it an actual form of the bond that once we have pricing, we drop right in it. It also talks about the structure. It talks about it being issued under the general resolution on a parity with other bonds. pledged by the general revenues of the authority and further secured by a debt service reserve fund. It identifies who the purchaser is. In this case, it's TD Bank, and it talks about the flow of funds. And so in this instance, the flow of funds is both easy and complicated. It's easy because the money comes in and it goes right back to TD, or they don't fund it, they pay off their earlier bond. But there's also in the earlier bond, a debt service reserve fund. So what we're authorizing also in this series resolution is a transfer of the debt service reserve fund of the 14 bonds into the debt service reserve for the 21 bonds. And then there's a little bit of a delta or a difference that needs to be funded out of the bond proceeds. So that's what this is approving as well. And then finally, there's a whole section in this series resolution that I think is more relevant today than ever before. And so even for you that are rolled hands at issuing bonds, this is going to be new for you. Whenever there's a change in the corporate tax structure, that directly impacts the interest rate that banks will charge on bonds. And so when Trump introduced the reduction in the interest rate for corporations to 21%, that had an immediate impact. Within 30 days, every bank then increased the rate that they had on that they were charging for the bonds, because they were no longer using a 60% factor, they were using an 81.5% factor. So what I've done in this document is keep that language in, but make it go both ways. So if after today it's determined that the corporate interest rate is going to go up, that will have the impact of forcing the interest rate on this to go down. And so this series resolution has a provision that says if that happens, your 1% or whatever the rate is at the time of pricing will go down further based on that. So that's a little bit of a nuance from what we've issued before, but it's always the case that in these type of bonds that are going to a bank and not to underwriters, that we have that one carve out from a fixed interest rate, and that's in here as well. The other thing that we have in here is Mark no longer has to deal with annual interest payments. We've negotiated semi-annual interest payments on the February 1st and August 1st. We have annual principal payments starting on 2/1 of next year. And the last interest payment is 5 years, so February 1st, 2026. Based on some estimated debt service schedules, it looks like each year, and you will want this for your budget, and I'm sure Mark has this, is about $1,365,000 each of the first 4 years, and then of course the last year is slightly less. So you're going to pay this down in 5 years. It's a very quick pay, and as I said, it's a very favorable interest rate. So when you're adopting this series resolution, what I've just described to you is what's in each of the articles. I am happy to take any questions. I'm happy to go over a section in particular if you would like, but in the interest of time, I just wanted to give you this overview.
Question.
And you're looking for a motion to approve it as presented.
Correct.
So moved.
Second.
Okay. Juan, you have a question?
Basic question. Going from the annual payment of interest to semi-annual, does that save us money?
Mark, I don't think it has an impact. It's just, you're on mute, Mark.
Standard on most of the loans we have are semi-annual interest and annual principal. And one of the loan we did in 2018 with TD Bank was a monthly payment of P&I, which saved a little bit of money, but the cost of doing monthly payments, and then there was an overlap and whatever. It was more of a pain excuse the expression, a pain in the butt to pay that monthly. The semi-annual interest and annual principal are pretty much the standard on all of our other bonds that we have right now.
Yeah,
Any
I
other
can just,
questions?
I would answer it slightly differently. And all of what Mark said is absolutely accurate, but also that monthly interest does not change anything. It's the annual principal that actually
Right.
is slightly more expensive, because if you're paying your interest beforehand, then the interest on the principal is slightly less. Having said that, there's been a lot of depending upon how the interest is paid based on a 30 over 360 or actual over 365. The trustee calculates it one way, the banks calculate another, and Mark is in between the two and constantly has to make adjustments. And so it's just not worth it. It's in the scheme of things, it's not many dollars that's saved, and the administrative nightmare of doing monthly is eliminated. So we view this as helpful.
Okay. Anyone else have any questions? All right, we're ready to vote. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. I see all of the individuals here. It appears unanimous. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Sandy.
You're welcome, everyone. Mark, I hope you're better, and thank you for keeping this moving.
Okay, take care.
Sandy, before
Happy
you
New
go,
Year,
I know
Sandy.
I'm late. I just want to extend my condolences on the passing of your dad.
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Yes, saw that in the paper. The next item is a presentation by Mike Crawford, repair of the East Bay pipeline leak. A quick review of all that we were worried about and how smoothly it went off.
Yes, smoothly. Let me share my screen here. All right, everybody see that cover page?
Yes,
Okay. All right. I'm going to take us through the whole story. The first half being everything that we've already communicated. So we found out we had a leak after working with Pure Technologies. We launched a smart ball. We inspected 38,000 feet, and here they go. They found 2 acoustic anomalies. Luckily, only 2. And at the intensity of the waves for the next 7 miles, everything being quiet, that is a very good thing, because we did not find in the realm of the scope of leaks, we did not find anything too significant, but it was a leak nonetheless, and it was a leak on our sole supply. So we worked with Pure Xylem to pin down the leak. We knew it was in the golf course, approximate to our PVC lining project. Looked like it was in the beginning of an area where we were going to be getting a little deep, working around ledge, and a lot of joints. Kind of when we first explored this, I showed some as-built, a lot of fittings, area where steel transition to ductile, multiple things that it could have been. So we were prepared for a couple different things. We knew we were in the vicinity of a flange joint, a bolted joint underground. So included here, this was something we've always feared with these flange joints. We have them on both sides of the river. And this is an example. We had this break actually 2 days before Christmas. And the culprit here was the bolts. So this is an old repair joint, and we can see significant corrosion on the bolts, the nuts, and that's just what happens. They're usually the weak link when it comes to subsurface bolted connections. So we've taken steps to mitigate this. We've upgraded the bolt types that we buy, and we also wrap all our repairs, which we'll see later. So we had to do this all in the planning stages because we didn't know exactly what the failure was. So not knowing, we go out, we dig a test pit. So we dig on the exact location. We find really dry pipe. All looks good. Pipe looked good. Corrosion protection looked good as far as the coating. And we proceed up the hill, and then we find it. We find it on the transition. And that's when Dave texts me and he says, "You're not going to believe it. It's a cracked flange." So here we have it on the left. That is the actual flange. That's the crack in the flange. It's bolt integrity looks great. If you remember what that other failed coupling looked like, that's what we expected to see. All these bolts rounded, the significant corrosion. All this is just dirt. Corrosion looked, I mean, the joint looked really good. So aside from this crack here, everything looked good. We were prepared for a couple different, to expedite the repair, we were prepared for a couple different situations when we uncovered this. One of them being the bolts. And we were prepared to change out every one of these bolts and work our way around the joint, doing one at a time, and thinking that was the weak link. And we were also prepared for spot type failures, a pit type corrosion where we could wrap a clamp around it. Sadly, this type of repair would require either removing all the damaged components, which would require the line to be isolated, dewatered, and repaired with components that at this size would have to be ordered and made. So significant lead time. Or the other alternative in these types of situations, encapsulate it, something that we were originally looking at. The problem is, it's the encapsulation is custom. And the other issue here is we can see there's an appurtenance actually right near the joint. If we had anything made ahead of time, we probably would have not accounted for that length. And at the cost associated with those joints, it would have been a shame because we would have had to then modify what was made. So we had to test pit it. When we go out there, we test pit it. We take actual field measurements, pictures, dimensions, and then those test pits and dimensions turn into this engineering drawing. So from this drawing, we verify everything. We have an OD of 32 on one side and 30 on another. So we had about 2 inches of differential across that joint. That's pretty significant with working with metal at that size and weight. So 2 manufacturers were consulted on this issue. The problem being at this size, pressure becomes a real issue. So at a significant failure, it's more force, the more pressure. So there was only one vendor that could actually handle the working pressure at this area. So this clamp is rated to 150 pounds of working pressure. In the area, we have about 50 to 70. So it's more than capable of handling the in-situ conditions. The other issue that we had to deal with is the diameters that we're working with here. So this steel, none of this bends. So we have to make sure that we build in enough tolerance to take up any potential changes that occur in the field. And that can be simply the pipe being out of round, it being a little egged. And that's very, very common, especially in steel pipe. It doesn't hold its shape very well, especially once you cut it open. It will have a real tendency to egg rather quickly. The other issue is steel piping has a fairly significant coating on it. So if that coating is compromised at all, you then have to remove it. Removing it along with the seam weld from the actual construction of the pipe. So all that is not really a huge deal, but it does modify the outside diameter of the pipe, which is something that you have to account for when you actually make it. Because after it's made, it's made. And then you're either have to weld onto it, grind it, and it would be a significant task to get that on. So, but otherwise, we did all that due diligence with JCM, and we had it made. So JCM worked through Thanksgiving to get this delivered. They were dealing with COVID in their plant during the manufacturing process, as it hit them pretty good. So they had reduced capacity. The clamp itself takes a while to build. These glands, all these curved parts, have a heat treating process to make them manage the forces at play. So those have a baked in process time that can't be accelerated. So some of that just delayed the process as well because of how COVID was in Texas at the time we were working on this. Then we finally get it and we get a major snowstorm. So it delays us a little bit. So from here, I'll let Dave take over. So for everyone that doesn't know Dave, Dave's our superintendent. He was formerly the foreman. Dave has a lot of experience with these type of clamps. I joke with him because he's a little older. So this is an older actually manufacturing technology for other tapping sleeves, where now we use more stainless components. But so Dave can take it from here.
Let me just ask a question about the failure itself.
Yes.
Was there anything that you could pinpoint as having caused the failure? Is this the kind of failure you'd expect to see in this type of joint?
So it's a multitude of things, and I can go up here. So usually on a flange joint connection, on a more brittle metal, say a cast product, you can do something called over torque. You basically over tighten things, and then you can compress things and strain the metals outside of their specifications. This is a ductile component,
Right.
not normally susceptible to those type of failures. Usually where we work with ductile materials, that's where things transition from cast, where it was more brittle. Now things have transitioned to more ductile products. They put different alloys in them to make them more resilient. So you normally don't see cracking type failures. So what exactly caused it? It's unclear. Could they have dropped it on install? Could it just be from over torquing? Manufacturing defect? At this point, it's difficult to tell. But this is the other issue is could it be fatigue and something that just arose? Yes, because this is actually the thinnest portion of the joint, because it's where you drill a hole to accept and receive the bolt.
Yeah, but if it's fatigue and not damage damage on manufacturing or from being dropped, if it's fatigue, then you would expect to see more failures like this, right?
You could.
How old is this line?
This installation is about 25 years old, and it was the joint selection that they chose to transition from the steel that went under the Providence River to the ductile that is the direct bury component for the remainder of the pipeline. So we have this joint here in East Providence, and we also have it on Save the Bay Drive, approximate to the Port of Providence in Providence.
Mike, how is the seal affected? I see where the clamp is put together. How is the seal at each end from the clamp to the pipe, to the 30-inch and to the 32-inch pipe? How is that seal affected?
I think we have, so you're talking the seal, if you can see my mouse right over on these pusher glands?
Yes.
Okay, so Dave, if you want to take it from here, he has some really good pictures of a piece of rubber being compressed into this space, approximate to my mouse right there.
So yeah, as Mike mentioned, with the manufacturing delay, we took delivery of this clamp just before a pretty good sized snowstorm, which kind of put the brakes on everything for us. We took advantage of Mother Nature because it just so happens it was going to be warm and rainy for Christmas. We made the decision to tackle this install the following week. We had a 4-day window. As you can see in these pictures, these are installs similar to ours that we consulted with JCM to look at options for the actual installation. This clamp itself was just over 2,000 pounds. It's quite heavy. It's tough to get an idea from the actual pictures, but it's about 4 feet across in diameter. So next one, Mike. As you can see on the first day, we had to open up the original hole just because of the size of this clamp, just for safety and access around the pipe. So on the left-hand side there, you'll see the original hole. Because of the snow melt and the rain, we were dealing with a lot of groundwater on top of the leak water itself. We ended up having to excavate just about to a 12-foot depth and install a much larger trench box just to accommodate the size of this fitting. You can see here, looking at the left-hand side, we're lowering in the bottom half of the fitting. At that point, the pipe had been cleaned, disinfected, and put some pipe lube around it to facilitate the gaskets as they were being installed. Next picture to the right, you'll see the bottom half. The contractor basically manhandled this 1,000-pound half of fitting underneath the flange. Going across to the right again, you'll see the top half being lowered on. This clamp was quite large with many bolts. There was over 50 bolts and 8 pusher rings and 8 backing plates to go along with it to hold the gaskets in. You can go to the next one, Mike, and we'll just talk about this. May clarify a little bit on how those end seals actually were. There is a V-shaped rubber gasket that goes around the diameter of the pipe, and the rings actually push that gasket into place, and that's the actual mechanical seal. And then the backing plates just reinforce those rings. So you can see all the way to the right, as Mike mentioned previously, we were wrapping our repairs in a V-Bio wrap product that limits the effects of corrosion on the metal parts. And then we used some good processed gravel to support the pipe itself and started the backfilling. So as it stands now, the site is cleaned up, rough graded. We're going to go back in the spring in-house, and we're going to just finish grade it and spread some lumen seed and be done with it.
Thanks, Dave. So yeah, so this clamp, basically like a clamshell. The two halves just bolt together just to actually fit on the pipe, and then we had to accommodate. We worked with JCM to provide a variety of different rubber gaskets for this joint to ensure we could cover any sort of differential in the shape of the pipe, and then it gets all compressed in into the space between the body of the clamp and the pipe, and that essentially seals it, along with the sideline longitudinal gasket that makes up the clamshell. I just want to take a moment here at the depth. So we were deep at this face. To attain the working depth under the pipe, we were at almost about 15 feet in this area. So it was a little bit of a challenge to deal with, and hence the larger box and yeah, as the groundwater. Shortly before this, we had that large storm event where we had like 3 inches of rain or something like that, Dave.
Yeah,
so,
that and the snow melt. Yeah, it was a battle.
So without knowing the repair, when we first discussed this, we were estimating at about 50,000. Because of the delays and the fact that we had to keep the hole open in case we had to reinspect the piping prior to manufacture with JCM and the multiple mobilizations from the contractor, we're estimating at about 100,000, which includes the cost of the fitting. We haven't been invoiced yet, so we will reconcile all the invoices and work with the contractor to ensure everything is as accurate as possible. But these are the rough numbers that we've discussed with our engineer. And as we discussed originally, we were going to pursue this as a contract amendment to the PVC lining project because it was on the same site as the PVC lining project. So the project as a whole was on target to be on budget. And with this extra work is still under the approved budget that was originally approved upon contract award. So with that, I can address any other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone have questions? Appreciate the technical detail.
Anytime.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Dave.
Yes.
Very nice presentation.
Let's go to number 5 on the agenda, the Finance Committee, their report. George?
Oh, George, you're still muted.
Finance Committee met today, and we have 2 recommendations to make to the Board of Directors relative to the capital budget and the operations and maintenance budget and the rate analysis. The first recommendations would be that we recommend a capital budget of $13,535,000 for fiscal year 2022. And we also recommend that the operations and maintenance budget of $9,243,726 be approved for fiscal year 2022. Those are 2 recommendations for the budget. And then under the category of the 10-year depth and rate analysis, our recommendation would be that to the Board of Directors would be that a rate increase of no more than 5% be approved too. Those would be the recommendations from the Finance Committee to the Board of Directors. And I'll turn it back to Alan.
Thank you. Anyone have any questions? I think the first thing we need to do is talk about approving the budget, and then setting up from this point, we will set a recommended not to exceed level of rate increase and then schedule a public hearing for that. Am I right, Pam?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So any questions or comments regarding the budget and the recommendation of the Finance Committee? Okay, so that looks fine. The form of the motion then, do we want a motion to approve the budget and approve the capital budget and the operating and maintenance budgets?
Move to approve the capital and operating budgets as presented.
All right, that's the 13,535,000 and the 9,243,726 for operating and maintenance. Is there a second to that? Gina did the, and Tom does the second. Okay. Further discussion. All right, I think, yes, Juan.
We're only approving the capital budget for the funds for this year. That's correct.
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. The other is the plan that's existing. We're not spending all that 13 million right away. So I think we're all here. Let's try a show of hands. Everyone in favor, please raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's unanimously approved. The date for our meeting is going to be on, where are we here? Pam, what's our meeting going to be on the 28th, correct?
That is the next scheduled meeting.
Right. Do we want to hold the hearing that same day and then have our meeting and make our final approval? I can't remember.
That's what we do.
Pardon me?
I
Typically,
make a
we
motion
do,
that we hold the public meeting prior to our monthly meeting.
I agree.
Second.
You mean a different day, not just by an hour?
Negative, hold it an hour prior to our monthly meeting.
Yeah, oh, okay, that's fine. That's what we've typically done. And then go into the meeting and make our decision. Right now, that meeting is scheduled for the 28th, starting at 4:30. Do we wish to start the hearing at that same time and then have our meeting follow?
that would make sense.
So move, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
And
Second by,
we're gonna have the rate
Bill.
hearing at 3:30?
No, 4:30, the hearing.
Okay,
And then we will schedule the meeting at 5 o'clock. And I say schedule it at 5 because the hearing, maybe no one shows up. In fact, we can even schedule it at 4:45. We can always start a meeting after the time. We can't start a meeting before it's scheduled time.
that's why, because I wouldn't be out of school by that time, so.
Right. Oh. So what, well, okay, so in other words.
It's good with 4:30, yes.
Okay, so if we start at 4:30 and schedule our monthly meeting at 4:45, that way if the public hearing, if nobody's there, nobody says anything, then we can go right in to our meeting at 4:45.
Actually, Ellen, typically I take about a half an hour, 20 minutes to a half an hour.
Okay,
And then if there are any public questions, you might want to have some time for that too.
all right,
Well,
so
Let me
let's,
just ask a question. Are you saying, Pam, it takes 20 minutes to half an hour to go through it?
Generally, I do a presentation on our, the projects that we accomplished last year, what we're spending the money on in the next years, and what we're looking to accomplish.
So my suggestion is you put that presentation into a PowerPoint and you post it on our website before the meeting. And then you could summarize it because we will have all read it and anybody's interested enough to attend the meeting could read it.
maybe we could take out some ads in the paper and say, this is the presentation for the public hearing. If you're interested in attending, you may want to view this first.
And I would suggest that we specify a specific date that will be available so that people have some time to look at it. And I would suggest a week before the hearing.
Does that sit with your plan, time schedule, Pam? Can you handle that?
Sure, that'd be fine.
Okay,
My other question here is having a hearing at 4:30 in the afternoon. I know, I think last year we had nobody show up at the hearing. There was no public outcry about our rates or anything. But I just wonder about having a hearing at 4:30 in the afternoon, if that's a time that is a good time to hold one. Is that in itself limiting people to attend?
you mean people who have jobs?
Right. Are we planning on having a large agenda that night? I mean, that's hard to say, I guess, at this point.
We do have a bit already for the agenda. So.
Well, maybe that speaks to we should have it on a separate day.
Alan, what have the times been in the past? What have the times been in the past? Pam might know.
I think we used to do it at 7 o'clock.
Well, 6 o'clock.
6
6
o'clock.
o'clock.
Because I personally recall a later time or later times.
Well, we would have the meeting at 6 and then the board meeting following. So the board meeting might not be till 6:30.
6 o'clock would be good.
Yeah,
I have no
understand
trouble
your-
with
I
that. It
understand your
probably
point.
makes a lot of sense to have it at 6. I mean, I'm a school teacher, so I get out earlier. I'm able to get there at 4:30, but the regular, ordinary, everyday run-of-the-mill worker wouldn't be able to get there for 4:30. They wouldn't be able to get there from 6 to 7. You know, Juan brought up, there's no outcry, but is there no outcry because we're sort of kind of preventing people from showing up? I don't know.
Well, this is a first. We've always had it at 6 or 7 o'clock.
Yeah.
And we've usually not had anyone show up. A few
Right.
times we've had one or two people.
But if you want to encourage public involvement or public review, you shouldn't set a time that limits it. That's
Well,
my-
if we have the PowerPoint put online, we put ads in the 3 local papers. Certainly that way people can see it in advance. We can see it in advance. And so why don't we set the hearing for 6 o'clock then and set our meeting for 6:30.
And people, you could even add into the advertisement that people could send in written comments via email if they weren't able to attend the hearing.
Fair enough.
Yeah, there should be a deadline for the comments so that they can be collated and presented.
By the date of the meeting, by the time of the meeting.
Can I ask once again, though, in our long-range plan, what was our projected rate increase for this year, Pam? 4%?
Generally, overall, we did have a 4%.
Yeah, 4%.
And the finance committee's recommended 5?
Right.
And not to exceed.
Not to exceed 5
Not
times.
to exceed,
Oh,
recommend
not to exceed, okay.
Not to exceed.
Frankly, from a political standpoint, if we advertise the hearing and not to exceed 5 and end up going with 4, that's shows a positive effort by the board to restrict excess funding. This doesn't mean we couldn't go to 5, but it simply would say if upon discussion 4 is sufficient, then we've at least shown the public that we're tightening the range as much as possible.
And I agree with the making the time a little later, just so people can't say we tried to submarine them.
Right, you're right.
But yeah, I've been kind of concerned, maybe Jerry, you can speak to some of this. Are we in tune with the open meetings law? Because we have a lot of 4:30 meetings.
Oh, yeah.
Which
We
are
are
fine.
totally in compliance with the open meeting law.
Yes.
Yeah, the open meeting law doesn't set any specific time that you have to have the meeting.
Okay,
Just that we have to notify.
correct.
Yeah.
Right, right.
Many similar public agencies like the Bristol County Water Authority have their meetings during the daytime.
Public Utilities Commission is always daytime, isn't it?
Yes, they're open meetings. So when they hold open meetings to rule on, whatever they're ruling on, it's during the day.
In fact, I've been to one of those at like 10 o'clock in the morning.
Yep.
So it's not, you weren't working, you had to go there.
But in the history of the Public Utilities Commission, judging based on the issues before a rate case, they may hold public hearings in the evening in the communities affected.
They do.
All right. So we're all set. We're going to do this at 6. We'll set our meeting at 6:30. We'll have a PowerPoint presentation available at least a week in advance. We'll advertise that in the local newspapers ahead of that, and we'll request, or we offer in our ad, suggest if they have questions to submit them via email in advance. So we'll be able to deal with everybody's interest. Are we ready to vote? All those raise your hand if you're in favor of the motion as I've described it, and it appears again unanimous. Thank you. That's all I have for the meeting.
What's that date again?
Pardon me?
Alan, what was that date again?
That's the 28th. That's on Thursday, the 28th.
Okay, I got that.
Thank you all. Happy New Year. A motion to end our meeting is in order.
So moved.
Adjourn, second.
Seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Have a drink.
Mike, maybe we ought to buy a 50-gallon drum of Flex Seal. We will take care of all these problems.
Good night.
I suggested that last week.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you.
Yes, yes,
Have a
good
good one.
presentation. Good night now.
Happy New Year,
New
everybody.
Year, everyone.
New
Yeah,
Year.
same
Have
here.
a good night.